What is up, Team Eternal? Welcome to another EPL Eternal Logos podcast. We are back in the studio. I got a couple of episodes out this year. They were late, but we are back, just like I promised. I say I promised a lot, which is awesome. I have a guest in the studio. This is amazing because this came about pretty quickly. I talked to my buddy here, and we decided to do an episode. He's an incredible thinker. I'm so happy to have him on the podcast as a guest. I think you guys will enjoy the conversation today. I don't have really any announcements other than we're going to continue to roll this year. We're going to try to get out at least 1 or 2 episodes a month. I know I tried that last year. Wasn't as successful as I wanted it to be, but we're halfway through the year. But who knows what's going to happen. So I'm going to try to get 2 out for the rest of the year, and we'll see how it goes. And I have some other people lined up. But I won't bore you guys with any more details. But I met my buddy Brett here from another talk event that we used to do together. And now he's in the studio, so I'm excited to have him. So what is up, my bud?
Yeah, great to be here, man.
Yeah. This is awesome. I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's nice to continue having these sorts of conversations. Obviously, you and I have shared many debates, and I don't love the word debate because it's a bit argumentative and about who's right or wrong. But obviously, at these meetups that we'd been to, it's all about finding a deeper truth and expanding awareness and stuff. And you and I have a shared interest on that. And here we are now doing the same thing. So great to be here, man. Yeah.
I always say this too. This will not be the first and last one. This will be the first of many, hopefully.
I would love that.
So it'll be awesome. Like I always tell you guys, liking and subscribing, of course, is optional, and commenting is mandatory. Always interested to know what you guys think, where you guys are with things, and join in the conversation. So, like we normally do, I'm going to ask Brett to introduce himself. Of course, he's going to plug any of his social media, anything that he's doing in life. You don't necessarily have to do a long introduction. If you want, you can tell him. If you can't tell from the accent, of course, amazing. The accent is awesome. So if you can, we'll guess to see where he is. Pause the video, try to guess to see where the accent is from, and then be honest. Put it in the comments, and if he sees it, he'll give you a thumbs up if you were correct or not. So we'll play a little game. But go ahead, introduce yourself. Of course, after you introduce yourself, we'll have you introduce the topic. I do not know what it is. We've kind of deliberated on some options, but he hasn't told me exactly what it is yet. So, that's what we like to do on the podcast. So go ahead and introduce yourself when you're ready.
Yeah, cool, man. Hey, guys, my name is Brett Solomano. And, where do I start introducing myself? I normally have this sort of pre-written for podcasts when I do that because it's just easy to go, here, just say this.
Definitely spitball it, whatever you got.
Passing it back to me. But I guess to summarize, I've been in the film industry off and on for about 15 years as a stunt performer. And in between film jobs, I'd always do other different jobs, and I was always very fascinated by learning. And more recently, in the last several years or so, I've gradually become more aware of my desire to coach and support other people, and where my desire to inspire and excite others through the film industry as a stuntman, that is the old sort of more surface level awareness and value for me. Not that there's anything right or wrong about any of these values, but just as I've gone along, it's now I realize what's more important to me is having a deeper, profound effect on people and offering people instead of just excitement. It's about inspiring. It's about educating. It's about, cracking people open, cracking ideas open, peeling back layers and seeing what's under there. So, grew up in Australia. If you wrote that down in the comments, there you go. Congratulations. I was born in Australia, grew up in Australia, and moved to the US when I was 27, about 10 years ago. Been in the film industry for a little bit, but have more recently made the commitment to go full time with coaching because that's where my love is. It's the seeing people have an aha moment right in front of you, that personal experience,
That's awesome. What kind of coaching exactly? Like, what would you?
So essentially life coaching or business coaching, but in such a way where people can see something about themselves or the world that they can't unsee, that aha moment, right?
Yeah.
And it could be around, I love working on topics like developing confidence, working on procrastination and clearing procrastination, building life skills and going, I've always wanted to do that, but I don't know what that is or how that is.
Right.
Taking the intangible, such as overcoming fear, or, I wanted to go on a date with someone, but I don't know, like, what do you do on a date? And just breaking it down and making it super functional.
That's awesome.
So it's, I've been seen on TV by millions of people, for example, on some TV shows like Stranger Things and NCIS
awesome.
Los Angeles and The Walking Dead and stuff.
There you go.
But I realized none of those people, I don't get to have a personal relationship with them. And that to have that personal connection is actually a more crucial part of the work that I want to do and the impact I want to have on people. So that's where coaching is like, I think that's sort of the next progression for my contribution to the world.
Nice. I'm sure that'll have some impact on the discussion that we have today. All right, next question. What's your worldview?
What's my worldview?
Yeah. Very important question on the podcast to try to get a baseline for where a person's coming from.
Yeah, man. It's funny you mentioned that because, we were going to talk about one of my coaching methods that I use, which is program theory, which is a concept that I've developed to help people see more worldviews. And there's essentially two parts to program theory, which is being conscious of worldviews that people have and multiple worldviews that people could have to interchange them. And then the program is the functional mental voice that you might have, the self-belief, are you talking positively or negatively, how you commentate your life, and also the actions that you take as well. To then, okay, if I want to start a business, what I have to do is this, this, and this. And what does your functional day look like by taking those actions to achieve that thing? So to answer your question about worldview, what I love is to be able to sit in the middle between everybody else's worldviews, because I'm a compulsive learner, and I love being able to say, Mike is a smart guy. What does he know that I don't? Take a little bit from him. And it's a little bit selfish in that way. Like, I'm not going to have my own worldview. I'm just going to take from everybody else's.
Borrow. Nice.
And, speaking about religion, for example, I sort of try to sit somewhere in the middle about, I know something else is out there bigger than myself. I believe there's a God of some kind, but I don't necessarily lean into a particular religion. So to look at all these different religions and go, where did they all come from? Did one start another religion? What are the morals in those religions? What is the community in those religions? And be able to pull from each of those into something that's more congruent for myself with the freedom of expression, but also the discipline of self to not get all out of space and self-expression and break apart community or value for the self. So there's a balance and a blend there. But again, to answer your question, not to dodge the question, but my worldview is, I guess, it's fundamentally developed from other people's worldviews in a way that is most valuable, hopefully, for myself. And if from a coaching point of view, I call that program theory.
Cool. Well, there you go, guys. Worldview and introduce a topic at the same time. So coaching. Let's go ahead and do the ceremonial flip. There you go, guys. And
cool. It's an honor. There you go.
Appreciate you, man. So I guess probably if you could tell us what program theory is, maybe one more time, but maybe this time, maybe give a little bit of explanation on why you think it's important. Right. Sure.
Yeah. So you've done personal development quite a lot. I know. And when it comes to a lot of I think going back a step, where a lot of people get into personal development is potentially, and I'm just totally generalizing here, but in their early 20s and it could be any time in their life, but they did everything they were told to do by their community, by their parents, by their family, by their school. They got a job and then they thought, well, hang on a sec, there's something else here. Like something feels like it's missing.
Right.
And they get into personal development, self-development, whatever you want to call it. They look up questions online like I did, how to get a girlfriend, or how to make more money, or how to feel better about myself, how to get more confidence. And it's all these other skills, like these micro skills, but very foundational skills that are not necessarily taught in a school or in a classroom somewhere. And then you keep going down the rabbit hole and there's all these other things and you realize that your religion or your family values or whatever, it's like, oh, I have to try this other thing because that's more congruent. And so you keep looking for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. what I've realized is that at some point, you don't need more. You actually need to step back and go, okay, I've got 20 tools here. Mm-hmm. They all serve a purpose in some way. Maybe one tool is used more day to day, one is used more once a month, once a year, and it's a bit more of a specialist tool. But I don't need more tools. I need to become a better, more conscious craftsman in life, to pick those tools. And so that's what program theory was for me, was kind of this perception that I would have with other people where I can sort of, I'm not saying I've been a great coach since I was born, but I had the gift of perceiving people, I think, for a long time, and perceiving, you did this was the problem, this could be a solution, sort of this intuitive pathway they might be able to take. Mm-hmm. And program theory was then the conscious communication of sort of unpacking that. Yeah. And getting people to be able to step back and realize they don't need more tools, they don't need more skills. I think it's great to learn. Yeah. But you need the discernment and the self-awareness when you step back to be able to go, now's the time to grab this tool and go from there. Yeah. And so functionally what that looks like is there's two parts to program theory. There's the worldview, as you say, looking at life through a scientific lens where everything's biology and chemistry and physics and mathematics. And again, I'm making it very rudimentary. Mm-hmm. But then also, you might look at life through a purely religious lens, which is God made everything, 7 days, Adam and Eve, all that kind of stuff. And it's all based on the Bible or whatever your religion is. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But then to be able to step back, how can you combine these in a way that feels congruent, is true objectively and subjectively for you, and gives you a better sense of satisfaction, Yeah. And people who have more limited worldviews, how can you then approach these people and still communicate respectfully, knowing that they are where they're at, and that's fine. Yeah. And get and receive value from people in any capacity and have compassion. Yeah. And then the second part is the programs, which is the mental or the physical functionality to be able to show up and go, okay, if I'm going to start a business, I really am not that great at sales, and I know I probably need to sell something. What does that look like? How do I communicate value? How do I listen for value? How do I have the stamina to make so many phone calls or emails and develop that mental awareness, but also that functional showing up and the physicality to actually do that? Yeah. And it's just about essentially bringing out more awareness and consciousness to worldview and physical and mental programs. Yeah.
Dude, I have so many thoughts. Like you mentioned, there was maybe 4 or 5 things that you said there that resonated with me, but also questions that I could particularly answer that we can go down. So let's start here first. So I think we think very similarly, or at least you had mentioned this to me before about program theory. I think we had a brief conversation, and we align on that. And I think the names or the semantics around what you would call a program theory versus sort of like my methodology, even with this podcast, like we've talked about, I think truth is very important, right? There is, like you said, there's maybe, tools in life, right? There's certain values, and even talking to people I know, talking to Caroline, my lady, what's up, Caroline? Even talking to her, right? Like she, she's very interested in therapy, in the world of therapy, and, what that can do for a person, coaching is another way of, and so what I mentioned to her was all the values seem the same, right? There's something true about values that we have as human beings that serve us, that are functional, that, sort of get us to where we need to go, or help to ground us for where we want to go. And you can take many pathways, right? Like sometimes people may need professional help. Somebody might need to see a therapist. Somebody might need to go talk to a coach to get inspired, right? To help guide them in a way. Or somebody might, from a religious perspective, feel, intrinsic value and worth because they believe that there's a higher power out there that believes in them. They believe in it, and there's some relationship there. And so, so there's the core of it, in essence, is there's a value that is very important, right? And I think, and so that's where you resonate there. And so hopefully, I think what people will get out of this is that core at the core as we continue to explore some of these other ideas, because I think that's extremely important, right? And then you said the use of the tool, right? if you don't use the value in the right place, or if somebody who needs therapy goes and talks to a religious leader, they might not get what they need from that person because it's not the proper place to go for the thing that they need.
That's right.
In that moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so the question I want to go down the route that I want to take, though, is that because you mentioned, because this resonates with me because I'm very, very much into intellectual things. I love biology, chemistry, physics. I love seeing religious truth exemplified and highlighted in the reality that we're exploring in the scientific realm, right? So I do believe those two things, I don't think they're opposed. And so seeing how they relate and how they work together to me is like the most fascinating thing ever. And so I want to go down, sort of talk a little bit about that and see how sort of that relates to what you were saying with program theory and how that works. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
So what would you say, like, what's your theory about that, right? The religious realm, the scientific realm, how it applies to program theory. Like, what do you think about that overall as
far as like biology versus religion for the creation of, And, you know, I'll preface this with the reason why I don't put a big, massive stake in the sand in my own life and beliefs to say, I think God exists and he created earth in 7 days, et cetera, is because I want to stay humble enough to keep asking questions and keep challenging, and I'll hold it for a little bit. And I'm not religious, but I've been to plenty of Bible study classes before, and I found them all very fascinating, you know, and they all teach a little bit differently. And as you know, as a Christian yourself, every church and every pastor is preaching the gospel in different ways,
right?
And that's beautiful. You know, I love that. But there are, into that sense, every hammer is slightly different. Every screwdriver, you know, screws something in differently.
Right.
So for me to not put a big stake in the sand, it's just very fascinating to me for me to say, I don't know what's outside my fishbowl. You know, I'm a fish in the fishbowl. I've never been out there.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm a three-dimensional being, probably having a fourth dimensional experience of some kind. And if I meditate, I can have some kind of fifth dimensional experience.
It's a cool way to think about it.
Yeah. But how do I stay in that fifth dimensional space, if that's possible, if we can be fifth dimensional beings, right? And to come back to the simpler metaphor, how do I be the fish outside the fishbowl as a human when I'm only a fish?
Yeah.
You know, I can hypothesize.
Yeah.
But that's just where it gets very interesting.
Yeah,
and
that's deep philosophical waters right there.
Yeah,
that's
deep philosophical waters. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I guess to answer your question that I think you're asking is, what do I believe about the Bible? I think there's a little bit of truth in every bit of fiction, a bit of fiction, every bit of truth. And without knowing a whole lot about the Bible, I think at some point things have changed, things have moved, people have retranslated. And again, I think there's a lot of truth in the Bible. I think there's a lot of value in the Bible and in religions that follow the Bible. But then I look at it and go, how is it possible if this is the truth? Why are there all these offshoots?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
So to that point, I think they're all true, you know, but you can't read it from a three-dimensional lens perhaps and just read it as functional words on the paper. I think you have to have a transcendental experience from reading it. And this is where I just got goosebumps. So I've had a lot of spiritual experiences in my life through a lot of different methodologies, but I've had a few Christian experiences as a non-Christian where I've got that Holy Spirit goosebump feeling, like something is in the room with me, you know? And so to that extent, what does it all mean? What is it all for? Why are all these possibilities taking us in so many different directions?
Yeah.
How can they all be true in a three-dimensional world? Well, maybe it's up to us to walk all these different paths and get to the final place ourselves.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in maybe what I'm asking as well too is, how do you think science and religion also layer? Like do you think, well, you said you think that they're all true, right?
Yeah.
Well, you are including also the scientific realm and sort of the natural exploration of mankind over time, because you also mentioned, like, you know, retranslating, because that's new. More information over time has come in with human beings, right? And so obviously if you're a religious person, you have to reconcile some of that. You have to reconcile that in a belief that, when it was back in the day before we knew that the cell was a thing, right? Well, how do you reconcile that into your religious ideas and religious theories when the Bible doesn't mention the cell? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
And so, do you think that they are? Well, like I said, I don't think they're necessarily opposed, but I'm interested to know if you think they're opposed, and then I'll kind of sort of tell you what I think.
Yeah,
from my Christian perspective,
I don't think they're opposed. Again, it's like the screwdriver versus the hammer. You know, I mean, people have used chemistry and physics to create nuclear weapons. And they've used chemistry and physics and biology to study the Turin Shroud and all sorts of things. And again, so that's where the craftsman on the other side of the tools is possibly more important than the tool itself.
Yeah, and
you can. Again, the saying, this is where it comes from, right, is if all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail.
Exactly,
So if all you know is physics, you start seeing the world as a physical being, and there's matter and motion and energy, and that's all you know and that's all you see.
Yeah.
But then as a religious person, I mean, going back one step, if I'm thinking of it from a scientific point of view, there's matter everywhere. Energy is everywhere. Energy creates life. Energy destroys life. Blah blah blah. Now, looking at it from a religious point of view, God is everywhere. God creates motion. God creates everything, and God destroys everything as well. So you can take some of those words out and flip them around, and it's still the keys to life are still through your worldview in that way. And so again, to answer your point, if you step back enough, you see your whole toolkit. I definitely think they can all be supported to look back over the years of, biblical timelines, and even before that, prior stories,
to written history,
and indigenous cultures that were tens of thousands of years ago. Okay, so did they exist prior to the Bible? How do we reconcile that?
Yeah.
And I do fundamentally believe that there is truth in all of that. I don't think, I think most of them can be true.
Yeah.
And all fit perfectly. But again, you have to step right back out.
Yeah.
And almost get to outer space and go, that's what the world looks like.
Do you remember the side question? And then we're related back to program theory as well too, because I definitely want to make sure we don't get too far, right? Was there a moment in your life when you recognized or you thought, okay, there's probably something higher than me? Like when you started to believe that there is a God? Like, have you always been there, or was that something you sort of discovered in your life? Yeah,
I'm trying to think. I mean, there's been moments for sure. Like, and so this is a good example of multiple things can be true for me. So when I moved to Melbourne, I got into stunt driving, and one of my mentors said, you need to learn to meditate. Now, if you can imagine at the time, a 60-year-old blue-collar man in Australia in a masculine industry like the film industry, or at least in stunts, saying you need to learn to meditate, that's pretty out there, but I didn't realize how out there it was at the time, but he was far, far ahead of everything. I talked to my girlfriend at the time. Her mother introduced me to someone, and he was a channeler. Who would channel spirits. And so we'd have these sessions where he's channeling spirits and all this type of stuff, and he was teaching us to meditate, but it was far more beyond that about, contacting angels and all sorts of different things in that spiritual, religious space, And so I spent a bit of time with them, and there was a few experiences there where people had come down and been channeled by this person and by this teacher. And on the one hand, I'm really skeptical because I'm like, okay, let's not jump on the bandwagon too much. Yeah. But also let's assume it's true and see where it goes. So I'm trying to.
That's a great balance. Like it's a hard.
Exactly.
It's a good balance. Yeah. I'm very much the same. That makes sense to me for sure.
Yeah. So I'm listening to him, and he's talking about this racing car driver that had died, very famous, probably the most famous racing car driver in Australia that had died a couple of years before. And he's talking about his life and blah, 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 as though he's this racing car driver, like he's channeling this spirit. And I thought, well, he could have just read the book, or he could have just read Wikipedia, and he's making some stuff up to fill in the blanks, whatever. But then there was something that I noticed, and he's talking to the crowd about life lessons, about, success and career success and success in families and whatever else. And he starts talking directly to me. And I'm like, as a early 20-something, I'm like a room full of people, and he's talking directly to me. And then he's talking directly to me about driving now. And he's demonstrating it in a way that you can intellectualize things. But I mean, I can play air guitar on my hands, but you would know if I play air guitar, if I can actually play guitar or not, right? By the finger positioning and all that, you would know if you know guitar.
Yeah.
Yep. And so he's demonstrating stuff, and he's doing racing techniques with his feet and with his hands. And I'm like, that's in his body. How could he know that? Yeah. That's in his body.
Yeah.
That's embodied. That is spiritual connection. That's not just, I read it in a book once. And again, I'm not making any claims, but I've had that experience, and I've had other experiences where I'm like, I've had a spiritual download, and I'm like, there's no way I could have known that. There's no way. It's not like, oh, I'm thinking something about my vehicle, for example. I'm being a stuntman. I'm very vehicularly aware, and looking at the vehicle, something's wrong with the vehicle. And I can step out, and maybe subconsciously I smelt a special type of rubber. I don't consciously know, but something I could perceive, having been around thousands of vehicles before, But there's no way I could have known that, because what I perceived was that I need to slow down right now because there's something else around the corner that I'm about to hit as I come around this mountain pass or something, and I've had a few experiences like that.
Interesting.
But I couldn't smell that. I couldn't hear that. There's no, like, how do you justify that?
Yeah.
And those experiences, I'm like, all right, I'm going to put that in the spiritual box over here to meditate on at some point and just like tune into. So I've had a number of those experiences. There was also some very profound experiences beyond just this racing car driver, but I don't know what to do with that functioning.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was probably gradual over time. You would just have an experience.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like, again, I think we're very similar in that you have a balance where you're open to the possibilities of life and the universe, because the universe is a vast place, but you're also skeptical.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's healthy to have a skeptical eye of things, right? Because it will help you parse through, okay, well, that's fake.
Yeah.
And there's something there. There's something definitely there. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, I think, okay, one more question, and I'm going to give you sort of my perspective from a Christian perspective as well, too. And then we'll get back, I promise, to program theory and relate the two. Do you think people who are religious have an advantage over people who don't? Who aren't religious, right? Because if you're a non-believer, but you sort of have the personality type and sort of, we're talking about like having this balanced approach where you're open to it, but you're also skeptical, right? Some people are extreme skeptics, some people are non-believers who just, can't for the life of them tap into any religious perspective, be it theological or miraculous. But do you think people who are religious have an advantage because they are open to that unseen, potential that exists in the universe? And when they even experience like the race car driver, where you recognize, okay, there's something here, right? Some people just write it off because they're not open to it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know your thought on that real fast, and then I'll.
So diving into program theory a little bit more. Yeah. Yes, they have an advantage, but also there's a price with every program. Okay, because if you imagine the program, there's a benefit that you get, and there's a price you pay to use that.
Always say that.
Skepticism,
the cost of everything.
Yeah, the cost of everything. So there's skepticism and cynicism. There's a benefit to that. But then if you hold that tool so strongly, you're also missing out on any other tools. Yeah. Curiosity is you'd probably say is a benefit, right? But curiosity can kill the cat as well. Yeah. So you need to be able to dive into all those. I mean, again, I'm not religious, but I always admire, there's a lot of traits that I love about religious people who are truly religious. There's the community, there's the discipline, there's the commitment to practices and morals. I could list a whole bunch of those that I love. But also the downside I believe the downside is when you get stuck in that worldview, And so the skeptic, the atheist, the guy who maybe has been burnt 100 times before, says, no, screw you guys, I'm not going there again, and he puts himself in his little bubble, you know, that's his program. That's all his programs right there. And if that's all he needs to have a fulfilled life, I mean, I'm not the one to judge that.
Yeah.
And then you've got the religious people, they have their programs and their systems. And then, you know, me or other people that choose to deliberately dip and dive in all these things. I mean, you might say there's benefits to being able to dip and dive, but then there's also a price of not committing. So, you know, it's two sides of every coin, man. Yeah.
I love it because it's like there's a truth that we're talking about, truth and value. There's a truth in that is true. It's objectively true that everything has a cost and everything has a benefit, right? Even a worldview, right? It's of itself, right? You're talking about like, okay, well, if you're too programmed, you don't step outside the box. But if you're too open, you lack commitment.
Yep.
And how do we navigate that, right? And I guess that's sort of what you're getting at when you talk about being a coach, helping someone to first being able to recognize and identify, okay, that's the truth. That's the objective part of our reality, right? That you can operate in those two different modes. Okay, so one more question, and I'm going to promise I'm going to tell you from my perspective.
I love seeing all these like
it's so many different ideas. Do you think when you're coaching, someone can be taught that? Let's just say you have somebody who is in a frame of mind. They're a program, right, in that box. Do you think they can be coached out of that box? Like, because I imagine, like, would you, if you, as a coach, if you were coaching somebody and you recognize, like, okay, well, I don't think I can get them out of that box. Like, would it be worth your time as a coach to pursue, or would you, continue to try because you believe at heart there's maybe another value that everybody can be convinced to at least open up if they are, too boxed in, or come to some commitment if they're a little bit too free bird.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a few parts to that. I mean, one of the tenets of conscious coaching, and I'm sure any life coaches that have done any sort of training would agree, don't coach someone who doesn't want to be coached, And when I was a kid in elementary school, I joke that my first coaching moment was seeing what other people should do. And I'd say, oh, Micah, you know what you should do? And blah, blah. And then I'd run my mouth, right? And as an elementary school kid, that's totally fine. But I don't have rapport. I don't have permission, invitation, right? So you need a few of those things. And I have had people who've said, oh, I think you're great. Could you work with my son? Or could you work with my brother or something like that? My brother's going through a hard time right now. I would love you to meet him. It's like, I'm listening for is your brother ready to be coached? Yeah. And that's what people need. And it can be really tough, especially with family, for example, where one person has the different set of values, especially around like sickness or health. If only he just did X, Y, Z. It's his life. It's his life, Yeah. And so as a coach, I really enjoy working with people who I feel an invitation strongly, not just like, oh, I want you to fix me and I want you to take responsibility for my stuff is what they're thinking. But actually, I'm ready to change. Brett, can you help me? I think your method is appropriate, and a few other kind of invitations where I'm the right fit. And are they conscious enough to take any of my observations, if that's the format we're using, or are they able to and willing to dive deep enough? The other facet of this is the victim, villain, hero triangle, the Cartman drama triangle, where sometimes they want to, and this is just patterns that I've seen in the world where people want somebody else to just save them, But then if I say, well, what do you think you need to do to be saved? And then we could, if they can't answer that question and they just want me to tell them what to do so then they can blame me later on, that's not going to work. So there's multiple parts there. I think everybody can change, but only when they want to, and people make decisions emotionally and justify them logically. And that's the other part of program theory is if you have a program such as a larger program like being a part of a religion, or a smaller program of like, I'm going to go over here and play my computer game or go down to the fridge to get some food out or something like that. There's a logical justification for that.
Yeah.
And there's also what I call the self-defense programs. Every program believes it has a right to exist, you know, and you see it right now in political protests where one side says the other one's corrupt and the other one says, well, they have no political standing, and everyone's trying to justify the other one out of existence. If you look at political parties and police as social programs, they're all like, well, I'm a policeman. I'm meant to be here. The protest is like, well, I have a right to be. And then you get this whole clashing. Yeah. So anyway, a few parts to that. So people have to be willing to step back from themselves and humble themselves. As a manager, when I've managed people in the past, I look for the qualities that you can't teach, or that are harder to teach. Yeah. I think you can teach people to show up on time. Yeah. But until a whole bunch of people don't show up on time when you need them, you may not show up on time for other people. Right. Yeah. Especially when you're younger, and then you're like, oh, that's why everyone told me to show up on time, you know? Yeah. So those qualities, if someone's willing and able, I can go to them as a conscious person and say, hey, did you see that? What did you notice? And capture these little moments. Why do you think he did that? Why do you think she did that? Yeah. What are the benefits there? What are the drawbacks there? What would be the price to pay to have that benefit? Yeah. You know, and that's what a good coach does, I think, is just brings their awareness much more greater than what they have now.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. Okay, so my perspective on it is, and we were talking before I asked like 8 questions, was to sort of give my Christian perspective on it. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit before in conversations we've had, but I think in the context of what you're highlighting here, I think that it's a little more poignant. From a Christian perspective, thinking about how religion and science coincide and how they relate. And the reason why I think, especially in my adult years, you know, start when I was in college to where I am now, I think my exploration of how those two things work together has strengthened my religious belief and my foundation and my worldview, because I see that incredible and delicate balance in Christianity, right? And I think the central pillar of Christianity in Jesus, right, is sort of, when you look at it, maybe theologically as well as miraculously, it's manifest in the figure of Christ in that way, because the claim is that he is God, but becomes human in the flesh, right? And so you get this bridge, this gap that is closed, right? And the resurrection is a verification that gap is closed. And because it's like, for, as you can imagine, eons and eons and eons, religions have always been a question in the human mind. I think I just saw a post recently on like Instagram where it's just like the human mind is sort of programmed to worship. Like there's like a worshiping area in our mind where I don't know exactly how like true that necessarily is. I didn't dig into the, you know, looking into it or click it or read anything into it. But in my mind, that made sense just off of a thought. But in Christianity, the resurrection is the verification of that, because again, throughout history, you imagine that people have always wondered, is there a God? Pondered a God, like you said, so many different offshoots. There's values and things that everybody around the world, and people mention this all the time, like the golden rule is found in every culture, right? You have certain things that are objective and true about reality that can be viewed and discussed through the religious lens. But the question is kind of always sort of evaded. But is there a God? Like, is it just the universe, which is the exploration of science, right? Is it like, do these values, did they come about through random chance? You know, nature versus nurture, through an evolutionary thing? Is the human mind the pinnacle of that evolutionary, you know, progress throughout history? But the religious answer from a Christian perspective is, there is a God, because the verification of Jesus Christ rising from the dead kind of is like, well, this answers the question, right? You have this person who's claimed to be God, the Son of God, and manifest in the flesh. is there a God? Well, he resurrected from the dead. There certainly is no question. If you're if you understand the Christian story, the method, the idea, the theology, right? It kind of is just like, well, that's the answer. There certainly is one. So then the thought and the journey becomes a belief proposition on you. Do you believe it's true, even though you weren't maybe not born at the time, right? Do you believe the reports, right? Do you believe from a historical perspective and all the things you can know about history? There's a scientific element where you might start talking about like, psychology and those things. Like, okay, do humans lie, right? Because we're like, okay, well, there's a religions have popped up throughout history. Like, what makes one true over the other, right? And so it's just like, okay, well, human beings can lie to get what they want. So maybe they made up Christianity as a story. But then you start digging into those different areas. And so relating back to sort of my journey as I'm a religious, person and have been my entire life in my latter years and exploring those different ideas in science and biology and chemistry and seeing it become manifest and remain true and being able to reconcile that in my religious belief and thought has been, okay, well, this strengthens my religion. Because the unique thing also about Christianity is that Jesus, and specifically in the New Testament, it urges the importance of the truth, right? Like the disciples, for instance, say, if Jesus Christ isn't raised from the dead, then what we believe is completely vain. Like it doesn't matter, right? Which is an incredibly honest approach to your own religion that you're supposed to be lying about if someone claimed that they were lying. You know what I mean? So I see those different ideas and elements coming into play here because it's like, well, here you have a religion that stresses the importance, even in say it's like if I was to steal something, and you're investigating whether I stole it, I tell you, okay, well, go check my entire house. Like you're like, I know what you stole was in your house. I'm like, okay, well, you have free reign. Here's the keys. Go check it out. Right. That's incredibly not intuitive to do if you're trying to hide something, or you might tell them, hey, look in this area, check under there. Did you check under the seat? Right. Like, I'm like helping you through it in a way. And so I think what Christianity has been incredibly successful at is sort of what you're talking about with program theory, because it helps people understand those very basic tenets and those pillars of understanding. Like there's this incredible balance. Like Jesus had this incredible balance of being really tender heart and compassionate towards those who were less fortunate, who were afflicted, who were drunks, but then being angry and going after religious leaders, right? And so you see this delicate, like, and so it's like, to me, it's just like this really, really cool way of seeing religion answer all of those types of questions, right, in a very, very interesting way, while stressing the importance of the truth, while still having sort of an authority in saying like it's important for you to do these things because of these reasons, because it'll have some impact ultimately where you spend eternity, right? And so I'm like, man, this is like, I tell people all the time, even if you're a non-believer, read the Bible. Like just go read, like even if you don't believe God's real, go read the Bible, because it's just such an incredible story, right? So long-winded way of saying I agree with you.
Okay. You could have just said that. No, I'm kidding. No, that's why I love hanging out with you, man, because you're just tying more of my programs together. And, the religious program, right, it can be very narrow of like, oh, well, you show up at church and give all your power and your money to the church, and you read the Bible and you'll be saved kind of thing. And it's very rudimentary, but then you've been doing it for a long time. You're very intellectual. You're very conscious. And it's not just about that. It's like the religion program of you is like that. Expanded, and I love that. Yeah. And you've tried to integrate it into all the other components and parts and programs as well. So thank you for letting me walk through your mind a little bit.
Oh, no worries, man. Yeah, explore. I'll tell people, ask all the questions, man. I love questions. I think questions are the pathway to a person's authentic soul and mind, right? Because I always say to people, I'm like, well, I don't like just saying, like, it's like what you said about coaching. It's like, I don't want to give you information that you're not ready for, or you don't want. And so it's like, for me, I'm like, well, when you ask a question, then I know you're ready to hear an answer, as opposed to me trying to, or make you feel like I'm trying to give you something that you're not ready for, and you may reject it, you may get defensive. So I'm 100% about asking questions, and absolutely, definitely, the mind is open on my mind about that for sure.
Yeah, and just some things that were popping up into my mind as you were speaking. I think religion has a lot to offer at many levels. Are you familiar with integral theory?
A little bit.
It's essentially a ladder of awareness. And again, we could talk for days about that. But you start off with very survival-based instincts, and then you not grow up, but you improve your awareness up through these levels and encompass, rationality and community. You flip between masculine and feminine at times through focusing on self and other. And then at some point you get to, not to the top because there's more levels above, but you get to a point where you're like, oh, I got through all these other levels by rejecting the previous level. Now I must turn around and integrate everything beforehand.
That makes sense.
And it's really beautiful when you get to that level because you're like, oh man, everyone has been right. Everybody's right. We're all perfect. We're all just trying to figure it out. And I see that just in your conversation that you just, or that expression that you just had there with all those moments, because, I think we're all trying to be curious and look up to the metaphorical stars, to God, and go, what's next? Who am I? Why am I here? All that type of stuff. But I believe as soon as we try and take it down and bring it to the three-dimensional, it disappears. It's like I always kind of laugh. I love the study that you've done on religion, and I'm pretty certain you'd agree with. I always laugh when I see a picture of God and it's an old white man with a white beard. You know what I mean? Like that was probably, I can almost tell the century that picture was created by that picture, But again, that was their beliefs back then. And to bring that down, bring the feeling and the image of God down into the 3D realm and go, white man. Like it's just, everything falls apart as soon as you do that, And you look at all the other religions prior to that, and even more primitive religions, worshipping the sun, worshipping animals, trees. I think we always worship things that we don't understand, worshipping like lightning, right? The god of thunder, the god of the ocean, because we didn't understand the powers of all these energy sources. And so we give offerings and that kind of thing. But then as our consciousness grows, we start being able to accept multiple different realities. And a quick side note, the other direction I was going to go, talking about some of the spiritual experiences I've had, I've done plant medicine a couple of times, like ayahuasca and things like that. And you have these, it's basically God injected into you. That's what it feels like. And you don't inject it, of course, it's a tea, it's a brew, but you have a experience for a few hours, and it'll make a believer out of you pretty quick. There is a God, there is something out there. It throws you out of the three-dimensional space, But then it always makes me laugh because I'll have this epiphany or this awareness about myself or the world or how we're all love. And then I'll try and write it down, or I'll try and remember it the next day. And it's like, there's a knowing, there's such a humble, loving knowing that I now have, where I'm just in tears from this experience, but I can't speak to it. I just can't. I can't even
like grab and smoke.
Grab and smoke, exactly. Or I try to look at what I wrote last night, and I was like, "Man, what was I thinking?" But I know what it feels like, and I think that's where a lot of people need to let themselves off the hook, or we can give ourselves more grace by not trying to understand it, but just going, that's something that's important, And to the grabbing smoke metaphor, I love as well. The other one I was going to say was, if you point to a couple who's in love, and I say, hey, look at that, they're in love. And if you didn't know, you would say, what do you mean? I say, those two people. I say, oh, see the people. Well, do you see they're happy? It's like, yeah, I see them happy, but what do you mean they're in love?
Right.
Well, they're holding hands. Okay, they're holding hands functionally, but what do you mean they're in love? And it's like, okay, is it all of these things, the hand holding?
Yeah.
But no, I believe there's a feeling and a knowing that's beyond that points to someone being in love, which is very similar to the religious experiences.
Yeah, for sure. That's why I think we had a conversation at the Real Talk event once, and afterwards, and we were talking about love, and I started talking about like how love is action. Like there's a relation in love that without that relationship, it becomes very, very subjective. Right. I can love on something, but I can't necessarily claim that there's love between me and the thing without the expression from the other thing. Right. Or the expression from the other person in some way. I'm still working that theory out because I'm like I think at that moment I was like, I'm like 60% sure that this is a thing. I'm still exploring the idea, but I think there's definitely something there.
I love that.
again, from the Christian perspective, everything you just said is right there in the pages of the book, right? When you talk about Jesus becoming manifest, the entire time through Jesus's ministry, you get this sense that the people who he's chosen to follow him, the disciples, don't understand. He's given them very clear parables and teachings and showing them, and he's on the scene. He's healing people in front of their eyes, but they still don't quite grasp it. They don't quite understand what he's doing and where he's going, what he's saying, until the resurrection. That is the thing that sets them forth in such a way where they're now willing to do what they weren't willing to do before. And that's an incredible, like that, that story has for 2,000 years has inspired some of the greatest works, from a movie perspective, written books, Lord of the Rings, there's just
Star
many
Wars,
things that just have inspired, because there's a rooted truth there that seems to be, like, I've heard like Jordan Peterson say, like, Christianity, that the figure of Christ, that's why we in Christianity call him the King of Kings, right? It's like, well, we have all these other religions, but Jesus somehow, in some way, not just in mythological idea, but historically, right? So that gives it an authority where other religions may lose an authority, because there's nothing necessarily tangible, right? Like, I always say that Christianity isn't a religion that was born out of myth. It's not written. It's not, we believe it because of some mythology, right? It's history that we are trying to look back on and get the more deeper meaning out of it, right? And that's the experience also of the disciples, right? You don't really get them being like, when you read the scriptures or you read the gospels, they kind of all have a different perspective. John is the gospel that kind of just like, he's definitely God, definitely the Son of God. The other ones don't make that bold of a claim as fervently as the Gospel of John does, right? But that's after the fact. It wasn't when they were with him, and they kind of, it's like, you kind of get that, right?
But they feel it though.
Yeah, when he's walking, they're having these experiences. They're seeing him raise people from the dead, heal the sick, and so there's these it's like this you're striking a match, and it's not quite striking. It's like it's there and it will work.
Yep.
And then eventually the match is lit, and they are like, we have to tell people, like we have to go. We have to be willing to die for this now at that level, right? And so, so everything you're saying, like from a Christian perspective, is spot on, right?
Yeah. What I find interesting about that is, again, talking about the experience that we have. It's something lights up inside us to motivate us, and we don't know what it was. Something called me to do stunts, and there was a price I was willing to pay to have an experience and to give an experience. And then now that light inside me is calling me to move on elsewhere. For a period of time, for a few years, I was also trying to build a truck business as well, because I'd spent so much time driving. I knew a lot about vehicles, and I thought, well, this is the next logical step, But the motivation was not as holistic, and I got to a point where I just got so burnt out on the trucks, even though I was very gifted intellectually with it, that I just said, I just can't earn another dollar through trucking. And
the fulfillment was gone.
There was something where I'm just like, this is not my path. This is not my path anymore. Yeah, I'm very gifted and I have a lot to offer, but I'm meant to be doing something else. And to your point about the disciples following without any kind of mental clarity, if that was the case, why did they do it? Because they knew it was the right thing to do. They knew it was the truth, And for me to follow my own path in my career, that's been my truth. And whenever I've lent away, like, weird stuff's happened, bad stuff's happened. But if I keep leaning into that, the price doesn't matter at that point,
right.
And I think that's when you're living your truth, you're living your path, is the price you need to pay.
Right.
The work is the work, and you just show up and do the work, because that's what matters most.
Right.
Yeah. And that's your work on this earth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so cool, man, when you can relate and relate it in so many different ways. When it comes to like your program theory, what do you think is the application, like in terms of how a person can take this and utilize this in their life? So once you've coached somebody and they've gained what you may call the skill, right? How do you think, or what do you think is the best? Let's ask it this way: what do you think the next best action is? So let's just say, hypothetically, you coach somebody Sunday night, they get it. You think they get it. What do you think their next best action is Monday morning?
So if I've like taught them through a coaching session, given them a little powwow on program theory kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's all about bringing everything into consciousness in any way that you can. Some examples of that might be this mentor that I had, shout out to Roy Edmonds. You're probably not going to listen to this, but I love you, man. He was just such a mental person, and not mental crazy, but mental as in just a very conscious man, before I knew what that was. And there were stuntmen that were just like, just send it, go faster, you'll figure it out, But he was a very intellectual person. And what he taught me was this process called conscious commentary, where you're driving. Just imagine this right now. Imagine you're driving to work or just up the road for 10 minutes. Could you talk to yourself for that 10 minutes and describe everything you're doing and everything you're seeing? You can take a breath, obviously, but blah, 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 blah. And you just keep talking. You keep talking for that whole time by taking everything in your reality and bringing it into your consciousness. Do you think you could do that?
Actually, a pretty tough question, because sometimes we're just on autopilot, right? Especially when we're driving.
Yep. Yeah. And it's like, I've been driving for 45 minutes. How did I get home so quick?
Right.
And your brain's just switched off. That's the power of the subconscious to run all these little programs in the background, and you're driving. It's lots of data coming in, lots of little micro skills, but your subconscious is taking care of it. To become a better driver in that example, you need to be able to bring more things into your into your consciousness. So he used to teach me, bring all these things in your consciousness, because as a driver, if you want to become a better stunt driver, you need to be able to change them and tweak them, And I got to the point where I could commentate for about, I think my record was like 45 minutes straight. So I went for my bus test one time, and partly to show off to the examiner, and partly just because I wanted to test myself and show her that, because I was a little bit unconfident for a couple of reasons. But I wanted to show her, look, I know my stuff. Even if I miss a couple of things, can you kind of forgive me? So I was really like showing off kind of thing. Because there's a couple of things that if you fail when you get your bus license, it's like, that's it. Other things are just like, hey, you got to get so many points, and however you go about it is fine.
Right.
So I commentated everything. Every road sign I went past, I named. Every time I touched the signal, I named it. Every time I looked in my mirrors, I called out what I saw. Every time I looked at the dashboard, I called out my speed and my tachometer. So I'm talking about all this stuff, right? And that's a very common way for student drivers to lose points, is not naming or not knowing the road signs, because the examiner will say, what was that last road sign we went past? And I challenge you tomorrow, in my experience, all you at home, try this when you're going to work next. Do you see the road signs? And I believe you don't see most of the road signs. You might filter for them. Consciously, you definitely don't see them. People just figure it out, and they follow the traffic patterns more than road signs.
Yeah. That's for sure the case. It's like the flow of traffic. Like nobody does a speed limit.
Everyone just does.
Exactly.
Everyone figures it out. Everyone just copies the other people. So, and that is a program in itself, but they're not following the program of the road law. They're following more of a road craft and a social construct. Yeah.
I'm so interested you said that, because the more interesting thing on top of that, it becomes additionally interesting, we'll put it like that, is, for instance, if you are driving and you're following the flow of traffic, and of course, everybody's speeding.
In the US.
If you're pulled over, people will try to justify breaking the programmatic road sign rules, right?
Yeah.
They'll try to justify it. Why do you think that is? Right. Because in essence, there's something like, you're following the flow of traffic. So there's, like you said, there's the program there. There's this social programming, probably a mental programming on your mind too, right? It's probably a part of it. Also self-importance in some sense, right? It's like, well, I'm speeding and that should be fine, especially if everybody else is speeding. But my speeding is as bad as theirs. Yeah. Right. So if you get pulled over, you feel justified maybe in arguing with the cop. You know what I mean? Some people, probably not everyone. You know, I tend to be accountable. Like, so I'm consciously aware of accountability. So if I got pulled over and I knew I was speeding, yep, you got me. But in essence, it's true. Somewhere in my life, I would attempt to justify. Yeah. You know what I mean? Breaking the road rule, the road program. Why do you think people do that?
So there's a few parts to that are coming to mind. Firstly, taking a step back, consider as a truck driver that if you're a truck driver driving on the road and you're paid by the mile, let's say it's 70 cents a mile or something like that, which would be maybe an average kind of wage for an over-the-road truck driver right now. Yeah. They're not getting paid when they're stopped, when they've got a detention or something waiting for a load to be loaded, when the truck's down or whatever. And when they're driving slowly, they're making less money per hour. So they're always trying to justify going a little bit faster. And that's, again, just how can I make more money out of my day? Because I want to make my $2,000 a week or whatever it might be. So think about that. But then they're also got to think about safety. So I want to make more money, but I can't speed too much. But I will push the limit just a little bit. Yeah. But then I also have to make sure I make time to inspect my truck. Because if I don't inspect my truck, the quality, the mechanical stuff, it's going to deteriorate. Oh, the tire's getting a bit flat. I got to take care of that. So there's this constant pushing and pulling. You know, I can't annoy my dispatcher, so I've got to take that load, but then I have to sacrifice a bit of sleep, but I got to make enough money to satisfy my family, road laws, you know, my license. There's so many different push and pull. And that's a good example, I think, of this, like, well, as a truck driver, I'm going to just behave here in this perfect balance between all these things about safety and compliance, mechanical, and making money is a big one as well for that. So when it comes to that, and again, pointing out, you know, certain people, when they get pulled over, they might cry either consciously or unconsciously because authority figure comes in, or they think, well, I'm a woman and that's what I do. And I've spoken to plenty of women who do that. And not to bring in a gender thing, but guys have their programs too, you know. Another program example in Australia, we actually get out of the car when the police pull you over for a traffic stop and meet them at the back of the car because that's what's respectful. Interesting. But in the US, if you get out of the back of the car, it's dangerous. Ain't going to happen.
Get in the car, put your hands on the wheel.
That's right. Yeah. Get back in the car. Yeah. And they'll probably swear at you and maybe pull a gun out or something like that. So again, just different social programs, right? Yeah. But why do we justify it? Because that's the self-preservation of whatever program it is, you know. You were running late. You did, you wanted to do this, you wanted to do that. And that doesn't matter whether the cop is a good guy or a bad guy. Right. He's following the rule or not. He's compassionate or not. Is he being harsh or not, cruel or not? Is he being empathetic? Like, there's so many different aspects. It doesn't matter. He's going to justify his position and you're going to justify your position, right? And that's what a lot of people do in the US. Well, it's only 10 miles an hour over. You know, I was just keeping up with traffic, right? Everyone's got a reason, you know. And I think those reasons still exist in other countries. But I know in Australia, for example, speeding is far less socially acceptable. You know, road rage is more common in Australia, I think, but that's possibly because of less physical confrontations with firearms because Australia doesn't have so many guns. So again, there's these different social programs. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, everyone justifies them differently. And when it comes to, what else was I going to say? When it comes to getting pulled over, everyone thinks they're in the right, you know. Everyone, I know I was breaking the law, but my program of I was running late supersedes the law right now, officer, you know. And the officer might be running the law's the law program, or he might be running a more compassionate program. And so there's this game of cat and mouse of like, what can I get him to do to let me off and be seen as a good guy? And then people pull out their cameras because that's their program and they want to catch him out on him being corrupt or whatever. So again, there's this constant, and that's a great example too. There's a constant game of cat and mouse of this program and these internal values trying to justify their existence and preserve themselves. And if you think about quarter life crises, and if you think about midlife crises, and if you think about divorces and grief from death and that sort of thing, that is, through the eyes of program theory, programs essentially self-destructing because you want to show up in a way to your family because that's what you've always done, but now you've got a divorce. Or you love this person for 40 years and now they've died. So all these things about your whole day, every minute of your day revolves around this person in some way.
Yeah.
Now you've got all these like cables cut, these hoses that have just been severed of like, well, what do I plug into now?
Right.
And there's a whole, and I think grief is a lot of confusion in that way about, I don't functionally know what to do. And you have to rebuild of, instead of going to this person for this thing, I'm now going to go to this living person since this person's passed on. So there's a slight tangent there about, programs trying to preserve themselves. And when they get really hit up against, think about the grief of someone who has been arrested. Either they identify as a criminal and they say, yeah, I did it, I don't care, or screw the cops or whatever. And they take ownership of, yeah, this is who I am. Or they say, I thought I was a good person, and you always see quite often you see on the news where the mother or the family member comes, oh, he was a good boy, blah, blah, blah.
Never could have done something like that.
That's right. I just never would have believed it. Yeah, well, he's been charged and he might have been convicted of this crime. And I understand you might not have seen it, but maybe your programs contributed to his programs. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
There's a little bit of a few pathways there through how people interact and different emotions that come out. Yeah.
Man, it's so many different things to think about with this. And I think, okay, so let me ask this. Because I think we go back to the balance, right? So what you do in your coaching is, which is also what I think, ultimately what I think I'm doing with this podcast and this platform is showing people how to properly vacillate between these alternatives, how to manage risks, right? Because I think, or I believe at least, when you are able to critically think, right, it gives you enough of a self-awareness to recognize, okay, something is different or weird, or this needs to be evaluated rather a little more cautiously with a little bit more awareness so that I can then make the right decision, use the right tool, make sure I'm not applying too much force with this one particular tool versus this other one. If you get pulled over, okay, let me just not jump off the handle here or become fearful because I feel like I might end up in jail or something like that. Just being able to think, okay, rationalize, okay, I was probably speeding. The person is probably just doing their job, right? And so you start to collect and recognize the programs in place. And then now you can correctly navigate them in such a way to where most of the time, I think, especially in like pullover scenarios, if you get pulled over, usually if you're nice, usually they let you off, right? But I think that's because you are consciously aware enough to put enough of the programs in order in such a way where you don't alarm him, you don't set off his self-preservation program,
right?
Yours isn't going off. And so you tend to align and probably overlap in some sort of, Venn diagram, which is like, okay, we agree. We're actually both chill. We're both calm. And so we can approach this in such a way where we don't have to, go into self-preservation mode, get defensive or, where things can get out of hand. Right.
Yeah.
On the opposite side of that, if you understand, you can critically think through a risk. Okay, I was speeding. I can be held accountable. You learn how to become okay with that as well. And so if he decides to, do his job, which some people will look at as like, well, you didn't have to give me a ticket, right? You'll accept the ticket. Yeah. Right. And then you still end up with a harmonious conclusion to a conflict of something that could have been a potential conflict had you not taken that route. Right. And so is that kind of sort of what you, in your coaching, you're kind of attempting to hope to get people to do and be able to, recognize that balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's the harmonious word stuck out there for me where it's like, yeah, okay, I was speeding. And again, not a justification for speeding or anything like that, but okay, one speeding ticket every couple of years, it's a couple of $100. It's not going to break the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And you might actually say, you know what, that $200 is going into the coffers of the city right now. Mm-hmm. And so that's actually contributing to something else. It's a separate kind of tax, you know?
Right.
So you could say,
that's so funny because
I don't have to beat myself up feeling guilty. Yeah, I was caught speeding, but does that make me a bad person and a bad human being? Okay.
Right.
You can look at the metrics, the merits of that statement. And again, that's another self-belief that you could take on and shame yourself with how bad of a person you are because you were caught speeding. Or you just say, yeah, it's a cost of doing business. And yeah, maybe I could have driven a little bit slower. Maybe that area is a bit, it's a residential area. I might actually go a little bit slower next time, you know. And talking about emotions, you know, what I believe is that emotions are like your gauges on the dashboard. You know, people who are much more emotional quite often have very strong perceptions about this is all good or all bad. And, you know, people who have really positive emotions all the time, they're always elated. Quite often there's a negative side to that when something doesn't go right, because everything goes right for 5 minutes and, oh, this is the best thing ever. Oh, now it's the worst thing ever, right? When something doesn't go right. But if you can be more rational and critically think and say, you know what, today didn't happen the way I wanted it to because I got a speeding ticket, but I contributed some money and I'm going to reevaluate some things and had a nice conversation with a policeman or whatever, and I see some good in the world and blah, blah, blah. You can always see the good in every moment if you know how to look. And so that's what I try and do with people is, where are they looking? Where do they have biased perceptions? You know, the other thing I do talking about commentating in the car, that's maybe not a direct practical outlet to improve yourself, but it can improve your awareness in a big way. It's a form of active meditation or active mindfulness. But for clients that I'd have that had, you know, big emotional swings throughout their day, is I'd get them to do what I call trigger mapping, where you get this, turn a page on its side, you draw 24 hours, you say, okay, I got up at 6 a.m. and I didn't want to get up. So I'm like a -5 out of -10, you know. But then I had my favorite breakfast, I had to get more energy, and then my car didn't work, you know. And then I got my car fixed and I was on my way, and my boss said it's fine, and he let me off the hook. So now I'm feeling like a 6 out of 10, you know. And then I got more praise. And then you catch these moments of like, what does it take for me to feel good? You know, oh, Micah looked at me funny, or Micah used sarcasm. That's a negative, you know, and then I feel really self-conscious about it. And if you can catch those moments, you might say, well, he wasn't being sarcastic. He was actually just trying to have a joke with me, or maybe he's in a bit of a weird mode. And you can catch those moments. I think that's very important. So catching those moments. And what was the other part of the question? I got distracted there.
No, just so essentially, is that what you're trying to teach people with your coaching, just is how to find those balances and, you know, how to correctly place the tools, how to, you know, be who you are, but also recognize the programming and how to navigate, you know, the programs that people will go through on a daily basis. Like, I love that technique, you know, drawing a line and then kind of evaluating sort of how you emotionally approached things. I think that's really, really cool. I think that's genius.
Yeah. And then, so that's the mental programming to catch yourself and go, actually, I'm really self-conscious around Micah or something because I think he's so smart, or what, you know what I mean? Just the weird stuff that the mind says. And you can change the perception and say, well, you know, you find all the reasons why you're smart too. So you stop putting Micah on a pedestal. You know what I mean? And then once you have a more balanced perceptions and more balanced, as you say, critical thinking, more rational place to live from, more balanced foundation of being able to say, yeah, these are the benefits and these are the price I'm paying right now. You can say, what's the next price I need to pay? And then you can start taking those physical actions of being able to start a business, being able to have a relationship. Because a lot of people will procrastinate on those medium to larger size things they want to do because of unresolved or unspoken negative experiences, negative beliefs, or even traumas. Which is a whole nother realm that we could get into for sure.
This has been an absolutely amazing episode. Like, hopefully everybody enjoyed it. And we're wrapping up. I love giving the guests the last word, a final conclusion, something you want people to take away. We will have to do a part 2 for sure.
Yeah, cool, man.
But yeah, any other thoughts, conclusions that you want to draw? You get the last word on the topic and then call it.
Yeah, I mean, I would just love to offer everyone the opportunity to look deeper inside themselves and, go in and really look at the details, but also remember to step right back. I love the idea of the overview effect, which is an experience astronauts have when they're in outer space and they no longer see the world through black and white, man and woman and country boundary lines. They just see, the sprawling earth, and it's a very spiritual experience, I hear. And so I encourage you to give yourself your own experience of that, where you can just step back out and just see that we're all trying to get along and get it done. Yeah. And if anyone wants to grab a coaching session, you can reach out at astuntmansguide.com, or you can look me up on LinkedIn or Google my name, Brett Solomano. And I'd love to hang out with any of you who want to chat and have conversations like what we had today. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
take advantage of that, man. It's awesome to speak to people who have given this a lot of thought, which I think is another, I think it's a skill. And I think it's something that people should consider more, right? Because it takes time and effort to sit down and come up with these kinds of ideas, give it a name and semantics so you can make it relatable so that it actually is a benefit to somebody. And so take advantage of anything that, when someone's offering you something like that, definitely see what it's about and explore it. So I'm definitely excited, man. Like, again, have to do a part 2. We definitely will.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you so much, man. And thank you guys for tuning in. If you guys, I'll of course make sure that your handle is on there, the website and that kind of stuff. I'll make sure that's in the description as well too. So again, thank you guys so much. Hopefully you all enjoyed the episode. Like I always say, commenting mandatory, subscriptions and liking is optional. Let us know what you think. Questions we always ask ourselves on here is, what do we think, why we think, and how do we think it? Just to get those wheels turning, and so end of this episode, man, but the eternal never ends. Thanks everybody.
Thanks, guys.